Hey, Danny, how are you? Oh, you got eggs. Well, that's fun. Connecticut, San Antonio. Hey, Emma, how are you? Morgantown, West Virginia. I bet northern Indiana's cold right now. Um, so, hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was away last week. Wrote to you from a train and thought I would end up at home that night, and it didn't work out. It was not a great trip back from where I was coming because of the cold and the snow. So, you've asked a few questions here. I guess I'll let a few people come in more before I tell you what I'm doing next. Um, Wait a minute. Hey, Gwen. Oh, good. I'm glad, Gwen. Um, California, will Hegseth be confirmed? You know, I don't predict the future. All right, so a couple of things, first of all. Um, so a lot of people are asking me about leaving Facebook. I do not think at this moment that I will leave Facebook simply because I feel like I need to be here. Because I have a very large following here and it feels important to put the kind of information I put on here. I understand why other people want to leave, and I fully respect that. I will and have been working on really using my YouTube channel so that I can do these talks and others there on the YouTube channel. That's actually where I just came from, is talking to some people over there. And I will keep you posted. I will post on this website when I flip over there. I will try and broadcast here as well, but I am moving to YouTube is the bottom line. At least that's what the plan is as of right now. And I will I'll keep you into all this. I do want you to remember, and I keep trying to post this in places. I do post the letters that I write every night. I do post them on Substack. It is free. To get them, either you can read them. You don't have to sign up for anything. My best friend has not signed up. She goes there every day and she reads it because she doesn't want to put her name in anywhere. You can just go to Substack. It's called Letters from an American. It's my name, Heather Cox Richardson, all lowercase, .substack.com. You can either read there, you can just Google Letters from an American and it'll take you there. There is no paywall for my stuff, or you can have it sent to you to your email. There's no paywall for that either. But if you put in your credit card, which some people do, and you're welcome to, I mean, I do have to have some help, so that's what I use that money for. But don't feel like you have to do that at all. If you put in your credit card, it will charge you. The only thing that gets you is I do write extra pieces sometimes, and not on politics, usually on history or on things I'm thinking about. Or you can't comment without it for the simple reason that I don't want to have to moderate those talks. I have too much to do already. So if you want to leave Facebook, you can still find me other places without a problem. Just remember that that's there, and tell other people too, please, because I was shocked. I'm always shocked when I get notes saying that people really love my podcasts and is there any chance I would make transcripts of them. They don't even know the letters exist. The podcasts, excuse me, are just me reading the letter, but they didn't know the letters existed. So please tell people about that. And remember, my stuff will never be paywalled. That's the whole point. I understand people need to do that. I am in a very fortunate position. I do not have to paywall my material. And so go ahead and use it. Tell other people to use it. It's my service to America. All right, so some very simple questions here to start with, and the easy questions, I think. We'll see. I'm going to start with one that I thought was interesting, and then I'm going to get into the Trump administration. Somebody said, I'm always talking about Biden's successes. What about his failures? And why don't I ever talk about those? That's a really good question. And I do think it's important to remember that what I do is slightly different than other people, as in, I am not a journalist, I'm a historian, which means that I am looking for long-term patterns in American history. And so I'm usually looking to tell you what did happen, not what I think is going to happen, because I'm a big believer in the idea you don't know what's going to happen. But also because what doesn't happen is often part of a pattern, but it's a much harder pattern to see for me anyway. So I thought that was a really, so I don't always, I usually don't write about things until they do happen. And unless they say something important, I think about something that establishes a pattern. So if I'm going to point to my real disappointment with the Biden administration, it's that the Democrats did not get through the Voting Rights Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that were their first and second priorities when they came into office in 2021. Because I believe that from the vote, everything else comes. Now, of course, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema, then, both of whom are now out of the Senate, but who was a senator from Arizona, said they would not support those. And the Democrats did not have enough votes to override a filibuster in the Senate in order to get those acts through. I understand why they didn't do it, but I think that's a huge, huge problem in our country, because not only did those things protect voting rights, they also got rid of partisan gerrymandering. And I think partisan gerrymandering is the second worst thing in our system. I think the first worst thing is the amount of money that's involved in our system and what that does when somebody, literally, we have just seen the richest man in the world buy a presidency. So that is an enormous frustration for me. That being said, one of the things that has frustrated me to no end is all the articles that you're seeing nowadays coming out saying, oh, Biden was a failure, Biden was a failure. And my take, because Trump returned to office, and my take on that is that's rather like imagining Abraham Lincoln running, mind you, I'm not trying to make a parallel in terms of the men, Lincoln and Biden, but rather like saying that Abraham Lincoln didn't do a very good job if the Confederates had not left Congress. Because what Biden had to do is not only contend with the problems that were going on in society at large, but he had to contend with what I would consider a disloyal minority, even in his first 2 years. And considering that, they got an astonishing amount done. But what he was supposed to do about a disloyal minority still holding positions of power is absolutely unclear to me. With an exception, I'm not even going to look here because I'm certain I'm going to see it. With, why didn't Trump go to jail? And I'm going to jump in here right now to the report that came out last night, little after midnight, from Jack Smith, which is really interesting. I read it this morning. I would suggest to you might want to read it. Now, I think it's 137 pages long, but before you roll your eyes at that, remember that it's divided into a number of different sections, and the one that really is the one most people will be interested in is that first section that lays out exactly what Trump did. And much of that, maybe not most, but much of that is footnotes. So there are a number of pages that have this much writing and this much footnotes. So the actual amount of reading is pretty small. And it's what's known as a talking document, which instructs you what's happening as you go. Now, there's another section about why they thought certain things were chargeable or not. There's another section about precedent. There's a lot of other stuff going on that I'll explain to you in a second, but it's worth taking a look at because it doesn't say anything I didn't know and that I haven't written about, but seeing it all right there is truly shocking. But what is really interesting to me in that material, that totally shocking material about how Trump openly lied about winning the election. He knew he was lying. He worked to get states to throw out votes. He worked to create false electors. When none of those things worked, he then worked to whip up his people to put pressure on then Vice President Mike Pence to stay in office. But what I found most shocking, truly shocking, was when you see it laid out like that, you realize the power of lying. Trump was lying and he knew he was lying. And yet our society is suffering terribly because of those lies. And that, I think, is going to be a really important recognition going forward. The extraordinary power of lies and the extraordinary importance of pushing back against them. So that's my big takeaway from that first part of the document, because again, if you've been following this, there's not a lot you don't know, although it's very streamlined, it's very clear, but it just makes you realize the extraordinary damage that one person full of malice can do in a really heightened way. It really shows, and it really does echo what was known as the big lie from Adolf Hitler and his supporters in Germany, who did something very similar. But there are a couple other things that you're going to be interested in. One of them is, I keep hearing this, and people keep writing to me about why can't Trump be disqualified under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which says you can't hold office if you've engaged in insurrection, when a number of courts have decided that he did engage in insurrection. And I would like to point out that the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, acquitted Trump of incitement to insurrection in the second impeachment. So he was acquitted of that by senators. Now, they were all Republican senators, and they weren't all the Republican senators, but he has been acquitted of incitement of insurrection. But what Jack Smith said was that, listen, there's some court precedents that say that he committed insurrection, but that law hasn't been used in 100 years. And it's also not clear what exactly, for legal purposes, insurrection means. That is, most, and I'm being a little bit vague here because I don't want to make the whole legal argument. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but you can read this, it's all in there. But usually an insurrection means overthrowing an existing government, whereas what Trump did was he tried to stay in power. And that's got there's a different word for that. And Smith was like, I'm not sure that we could have won on that. And what they were trying to do was make sure everything they put forward, they could win on. Now, with those two things going forward, it makes it hard now for people to say, and who those people would be, to say Trump can't take office under the 14th Amendment, because under the third section of the 14th Amendment, because he committed insurrection. Do I think he committed insurrection? Absolutely. But that and $3.90 on average across the United States will get you a cup of coffee. So that is the other thing that was in the Smith document. And the other thing that really jumped out to me in the document was the section when Smith talks about how Trump weaponized the courts to make sure he wouldn't be tried. Because Smith argues, of course, that they would have convicted him on those 4 federal counts, that a jury would have convicted him on 4 counts. That's what they wouldn't have gone forward with those if they didn't think they could win them. But the combination of the Supreme Court absolutely slow walking his case, and then declaring contrary to all precedent and to the well-established ideals of the founders of the nation with the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitution, that a president must never be above the law, they decided contrary to that. And that, of course, gave Trump an enormous out. But then also they talk about the many ways in which they would, for example, subpoena a witness, and they would refuse to go. They would work that all the way through the courts till they would lose, and then they'd find something else to do. And at one point, Twitter simply refused to answer a subpoena, and they challenged that, and that took them many months to get what they wanted out of that. And that suggests, I don't know what that suggests, but it's kind of an eye-opener of the extraordinary degree to which Trump weaponized our legal system against us, because at the end of the day, the legal system is ours. And he managed to weaponize that, and to weaponize his lies to the point that he is now about to become the president of the United States again. And that's not okay. It's not okay that somebody lied and cheated their way into the presidency. And I don't mean that, I mean that in a current modern day sense, but I also mean it as somebody who is trying to defend the concepts of American democracy. I have 100% certainty that none of the framers of the Constitution would have winked at Trump becoming president. They simply wouldn't have done it. This is exactly what they feared. And that's not okay that we are now sitting here going, oh, well, oopsie poopsie. And we're doing so because somebody acted the way he did. And we could talk about how he got there. But I'm going to go on to some other things because I think that you are more interested. I could be wrong, but I think that you're more interested in that to start. All right. So if that's the case, so somebody just mentioned Trump keeping Hitler's book on his nightstand. That seems somewhat established. I will say, I don't think he ever read it. I don't think he's what one would call a big reader. Anyway, so some questions you asked here. Let me take another easy one first, and that is, why on earth isn't Biden insisting on the publication of the Equal Rights Amendment? And the answer to that, I think, is because the archivist has said that the general counsel has said that there's too many legal questions surrounding that for it to be published. I've talked about this before. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has said that they should publish it anyway, because then the Republicans would have to explain why they didn't support it. I would suggest that it's going to be difficult carrying things forward going in the next 4 years at least, because all of these things will end up before the Supreme Court. And having the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, providing that women are created equal into the Constitution, putting that before this Supreme Court seems to me a very good argument for not doing it. I'm not taking a position on that in this moment, but please stop writing to me and asking me why that's happening. That I think is what's going on with that. All right. So let me step back a minute here and talk about where we are right now. And that is that Biden is leaving this country with an extraordinary economy and with a much stronger hand in foreign affairs than he had from the Trump administration. And that is going to be interesting going forward, because you're already seeing members of the incoming Trump administration trying to talk that down. J.D. Vance the other day was saying, well, frankly, Biden's just left us such a mess. We're not going to be able to do a lot of what we said we were going to do because it's such a mess. That's just a lie. This is the strongest economy we've had in at least 50 years. And in foreign affairs, NATO is stronger than it ever has been. And the axis that has been trying to push against democracies has been extraordinarily weakened. And I'm not going to talk a lot about foreign affairs today, because you're going to hear a lot about foreign affairs from me for the next week. But that too is much stronger than it was, in part because what the Biden administration tried to do was it tried to spread the concepts of democracy without spreading imperialism. And that's a hard needle to thread. And what they did is they set up sort of, I keep calling them ad hoc committees. They've all got fancy names for it, but they tried to bring together different countries around shared interests, like dealing with the fentanyl crisis, like dealing with supply chain issues, individual certain things. But what that did was it meant that they tried to empower other countries to solve problems in their own spaces. And for the most part, it seems to have been effective. Like I say, I'm not 100% sold either way on it, but it is notable that Hezbollah, Hamas are dramatically weakened, and that Assad fell in Syria, which is, of course, weakening Iran and Russia. I mean, there's a lot going on. Like I say, I think we're going to be a long time figuring out whether all that mess was worth it. But there we have it. All right. So if they're leaving this incredibly strong hand to the Trump administration, what is the Trump administration going to do? So let me, and mind you, I'm not going to predict the future, but I am going to tell you where things stand at this moment. And at this moment, it is really, really, really worth remembering, first of all, that the Republican Party is badly splintered. That is, those members of the Republican Party who controlled it before Trump came on the scene, say in 2015, essentially were oligarchs. That is, they didn't like a lot of people voting, and you can see this from the Voting Restriction Acts that they began in 1986, but that really took off in the 1990s, and that they have continued to push and push and push, because when every American votes, Democrats win. And they win because Americans, in this incarnation, because Americans like business regulations. We like a basic social safety net. We like infrastructure projects, and we like civil rights protected. Those things we like. And by the way, until the 1990s, Republicans liked that as well. And independents have always liked it too. So it's been incumbent on them to get rid of a lot of voting, because if a lot of people vote, I mean, you can see this all the time. Democrats are right now, this is not a historic look, by the way, I'm only looking at the moment. Right now, when Democrats are in power, they try and expand the vote, and Republicans always try and get rid of it. So those people who were in charge until about 2015 wanted wealth to concentrate. They liked the idea of relying on markets. They liked the idea of supply side economics, which meant that that you turn the markets loose to concentrate wealth at the very top, because they argued anyway that if people at the very top had a lot of money, they would invest it in new businesses, everybody would have jobs, and money would percolate up from the top down to the bottom and back up again. And the problem with that system was, in fact, it didn't work. And between 1981 and 2021, $50 trillion moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% of Americans. And so while they really liked it, the way they kept voters behind that idea was constantly saying, well, you feel like you're being squeezed, but that's because minorities are taking your tax dollars. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, you can see pretty clearly that, if you remember Bill Clinton in the 1990s, he balanced the budget. There was a surplus in the budget. What killed the surplus was George W. Bush's tax cuts, the unfunded wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then Trump's tax cuts of 2017. That's not social welfare stuff. That's tax cuts and an unfunded military. All right, so they liked that, but they didn't want to, they really were using the kind of racism and sexism that Trump tapped into to keep voters behind them. They recognize the importance of a modern economy, which means you need to have women and people of color involved in the economy and so on. Maybe some of them were racist, many of them were closet racists and sexists, but really they were focusing on the economy. Now, what happened when Trump came in is he rode those that racism and sexism and the truly awful stuff into power. And I've talked about how that happened both on these chats, and I've written a ton about it. But what that meant was that, especially after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, he wedded the Republican Party to those racists and sexists and their evangelical voters who made up his base, and began to promise them that rather than relying on markets to drive the economy, he would put in place those religious tenets that they want so badly. Now, they're a very small fraction of America. They are a very small fraction of people, but I think it's about 4%. But they have now got the vehicle of the Republican Party behind them. Now, that old establishment group, they wanted Trump's voters, but they don't want to lose the reliance on a market, because they don't want Trump to be able to say, or Ron DeSantis, who did it, well, you can't have a gay day, or you can't rely on markets. You have to rely on a religious set of beliefs, and you have to rely on the Don't Say Gay law, for example, or the things that Mike Pence put in Indiana, or you have to get rid of abortion rights. They know that will hurt their businesses, and they don't want that stuff. So they already have a fight between the reactionaries that are supporting Trump for religious reasons, but also those people who have become fervent MAGA people who want to destroy the American government by For example, refusing to raise the debt ceiling or refusing to fund the government, because that will destroy America's economic power. And those old establishment Republicans depend on that. So do the rest of us, by the way. But they don't want to crash into the debt ceiling any more than somebody like me does. We may not agree about oligarchy, we may not agree about any number of things, but we share that agreement in a way that we don't with those MAGA Republicans like Chip Roy, who wants to let America hit the debt ceiling and default on its debt. So the establishment Republicans do not like the MAGA Republicans one teeny tiny little bit. And you can see this in Mitch McConnell, for example, who was quite clear about the fact that he was protecting Trump in his first impeachment because he wanted his voters for the 2020 presidential election, and in his second impeachment because he thought Trump was going to go away and he wanted those voters for the Republican Party. And now he's stuck with him, and now McConnell is stuck with Trump. So you've got that split, but you also have a very other important split going on within MAGA. And this is I can't emphasize how important this is. The people who got Trump elected in 2016, people like Steve Bannon, people who glommed hold of him like Laura Loomer, they believe in that reactionary, traditionalist, isolationist American society that Trump talks about. But now the people who've put him in office are the tech bros. It was Elon Musk, who's a very late comer to Trumpism, who put, I think it's about $270 million behind Trump, essentially buying him the presidential election. And one of the other guys put $100 million behind him. I mean, they are people of extraordinary wealth who have recognized that so long as they can get the power of the United States government behind their schemes of Bitcoin, for example, or going to Mars or whatever, creating a new global world, they're going to be able to put it in place. But their plans for increased immigration, for example, for a global society, run smack up against the old MAGA. They share some interests in that they both want to destroy American society as it currently is, and in the American government as it currently is. But that's it. So the whole reason I'm telling you all about this is because the Republican Party is badly splintered. And in Congress, it has teeny weeny majorities. So Trump can be out there screaming all he wants about a mandate, but in fact, more Americans voted for somebody other than him. And in the House of Representatives right now, I think the Republicans can lose 2 votes before they've lost a vote. And the Senate, I think it's 3 votes. I don't quote me on that one, but it's really teeny tiny. Now, when she was in charge of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, also had very small minorities, but she is a master of creating coalitions and of making sure everybody got on board to get votes through. If there is one thing Mike Johnson is not, it's a master tactician. Remember, he is a politician who won re-election through gerrymandering and at first by not having an opponent, and was a backbencher. He's the 5th person they tried to come up with as a Speaker of the House. He does not have the skills that he needs to nail a coalition together to get very much done. All right, so Thune in the Senate is different. Thune is actually probably quite good at what he does. He's been an understudy to Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader. But Thune is not a MAGA. Thune is an establishment Republican. So he has very little interest in empowering MAGA in the Republican Party. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because before you start wondering what's going to happen and what the Republicans are going to do and all that, you have to recognize that this is not a landslide and this is not a juggernaut at all. This is a group of people who are in what my mother would have called a mell of a Hess. All right? So putting that aside, okay, so there's that. Now, what's Trump going to do going forward? He has promised everything to everybody because, as Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo points out, Trump just wanted to stay out of jail, which is where I started this chat. He was going to promise anything to anyone so long as he could stay out of jail And so long as he could put together a coalition of people who would be loyal to him. To him. Now, again, let's think about how he does this. There was an interview with Jeffrey Epstein, got very little traction, and I don't really know why. I guess because the campaign was going on. But Epstein actually talked about, there's a reporter who has a number of recordings of Epstein talking about his relationship with Donald Trump, which is a very close relationship, by the way. And one of the things he said is that Trump's, and you guys, anybody who's dealt with a personality like this will recognize this, that Trump's way of dealing with his people is to get them arguing amongst each other. So, to make them jealous of each other, to make one person think he's listening to someone else and get them all fighting. And then he steps in to say, oh, you kill children, stop fighting. I can fix this. So he has promised, that's how he deals with people. And he has promised explicitly contradictory things to different groups of people. So, for example, he promised the Steve Bannon and Steve Miller Republicans, MAGAs, that he was going to do these huge deportation raids. He promised people like Elon Musk that he was going to cut and Chip Roy, although they're not on the same team in most things, that he was going to cut the deficit significantly. The problem is that the deportation raids are going to cost between $88 billion and $315 billion a year, which is a huge sum of money. And you can't do that and cut the budget unless you cut the budget somewhere else. But every place else that they're talking about cutting the budget are programs that are really popular. At the same time, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy want to increase immigration, a certain kind of immigration for the people who work in their tech industries. So how do you do that? I mean, that is literally not a circle you can square. I mean, this is one thing I do when I think about politics, because I'm looking for patterns in politics, is how do you make this happen? So if I want to accomplish something in politics, how would I do that? Where are the levers of that? But you can't say, I'm going to make people wet and dry at the same time. There's just no lever that you can pull that's going to make you able to do that. And similarly, he has promised to leave abortion to the states. People voted on that basis. And he promised the evangelicals that he was going to give them a national abortion ban. That was in the Republican platform under the concept of protecting a fertilized egg with the protections of the 14th Amendment. You can go look this up. So how do you do that? How do you both have a national abortion ban and protect abortion in the states? Wet and dry, same time. Similarly, he was going to have all these tariffs and lower prices, which tariffs by definition raise prices. That's what they've always done. There's no way around this. And what he did during the campaign is he simply told the people who said that, you're wrong, you're stupid, I'm right. Good luck with that, because literally that's what tariffs do. So there's no way to both have tariffs and lower prices. It just doesn't work that way. So you've got this guy coming in who has promised to keep people wet and dry at the same time, who is not a good manager of people, who's got not a lot of public support, who's got his political party splintered and having tiny majorities in Congress. All right. How's he going to handle this? If think about it, if you're you and you have to both keep somebody wet and dry at the same time, how do you do it? The obvious answer is you can't do it in reality. You can't make somebody wet and dry at the same time. It can't happen. So what you need to do is convince them of something that is not true. All right. So this comes to another thing that somebody asked about today, and that is Trump came out today with the idea that he is going to create the External Revenue Service, with which tariffs will bring money into the United States that other people are going to pay. This is bonkers. I mean, literally, tariffs are taxes. They're not literally taxes if I've got an economist listening to me, but that's the way they work. Coming into the United States that are paid by the importer, who then pushes the higher costs in onto consumers. They are not paid by other countries. They're just not. So what is he doing here? Somebody's saying, oh, he really doesn't understand that all right, maybe he doesn't understand. I don't know what the man understands. I will also point out he is not in good health and he is not mentally astute right now, perhaps never again. But he's trying to convince his followers that he is going to do something that doesn't exist. The same way I would argue that the Department of Government Efficiency, which I pronounce doggy, is a real thing. It's not a real thing. Like, you can't just say an agency exists. Agencies have to be created by Congress. And the fact that he's created this thing that is supposed to be a reality when it is not depends on the rest of us all going, oh yeah, that's a thing. And oh yeah, the External Revenue Service is a thing. It's not a thing. So one of the things that we're going to see going forward is, I would argue, I mean, I guess I can't say for reality, is to recognize that Trump is trying to create a false reality that we buy into. But he's running up against the reality, or will run up against the reality, of the fact that the economy already is good and foreign affairs is in a pretty good place too. So he's got to keep that keel even while convincing people he's doing something dramatic. And that going forward is one of the things people like me will be doing, is saying, wait a minute, this is not a thing. I see somebody just said, well, Doggy is hiring people. If it is hiring people, if it's actually getting them to put their names on the line at this point, they're getting paid for by Musk. The government cannot pay them yet. That agency does not exist except in people's minds. And I know they said they were going to hire, but they also said they were going to give people $42 a head for things, and now they're suing over that. They say a lot of things that aren't true, so make sure of whether or not those things are actually true. So what does this look like in reality? So what we have seen is, and somebody asked this question too, I hope I'm pulling all this stuff together. It's kind of a game for me. You know, when you send me all these questions, to see if I can make them into a coherent story, because they're all, what you do when you send me questions is you help me test the waters to see what people are concerned about and what they're really worried about. And then what I try and do is I try and take them and say, okay, this is a snapshot of America in this moment. And I realize that I missed out on one thing I wanted to mention before, but I'll come back to it. So what we have seen, and what I've talked about a lot, is this concept of creating a false reality that people will vote based on. And that's the idea of political technology, which is articulated by Russian political theorists. It's also known as virtual politics. And the idea is that you create a false reality and that people vote based on it. And you are able to do that extraordinarily efficiently through social media in a way that you couldn't before we had social media, although obviously people in the past have done such a thing. People like the propaganda minister under Adolf Hitler did very similarly. But the idea of political technology depends on people being able to see things that are real and sort of understanding them in a different way so that they react to that fake reality. What we're going to see going forward is whether or not Trump is able to sustain that under these conditions. And what is key to being able to do that is to having a compliant media and to having a compliant populace. And that I'm actually gonna take a little bit of a detour here, because It also depends. See, I think I figured out a way to make this work. It also depends on keeping his political party compliant as well. And now I'm going to turn to the Hegseth hearings today, which is a detour that I meant to make earlier, and now I'll do it. And that is, Hegseth is not qualified to be the defense secretary. And what I mean by that when I say it is defense secretaries are the best of the best, even if you don't agree with them. As I often don't, just don't even start me on some of these people. They need to know what they're doing. They have background in intelligence. They usually have advanced degrees. They know a number of languages. They know how different countries work, because you want your military to be the last resort. I mean, think about it. Think about the theory of a military. The most important part of a military is making sure you don't have to use it. Because what you really want to do is you want to solve problems with other countries through diplomacy. And that's where our State Department comes in. We don't pay enough attention to how much state does, not only in terms of the stuff you read in the newspapers, but also in terms of making sure we have ties to other countries through things like art exhibits, or through things like sports, or through things like cultural exchanges, or school exchanges, because those create filaments of ties that make it easier for countries to understand each other. And one of the things that a defense secretary does is be the first point of the rub when there are issues that it looks like state can't handle. So one of the reasons that Trump is so angry about the current defense secretary is after the insurrection on January 6th, the Secretary of Defense made calls to, this was Mark Milley, made calls to his counterpart in China to say, back off, we're still a stable country and don't try anything. And that's important because when a country is unstable, it often offers up a whole lots of opportunities for other countries to cause trouble, not necessarily with a direct attack, but with poking at other places and doing things. So you want a defense secretary who is very qualified and who understands the importance of diplomacy, because that saves lives. And it saves lives not only in other countries, it saves lives in the United States as well. That's not Hegseth. Hegseth caught Trump's attention because Hegseth defended men who had committed war crimes. And the military is really strict about that, has a very long history for very good reasons. Just don't even start me. But the fact that Trump stepped in to stop the punishments of people who were not behaving according to military code is a huge deal, because the military needs that. It needs to have its codes. It needs to make sure that it keeps people under a very strict code of ethics, because if you don't have that and you're engaged in the kinds of activities those people are, you destroy not only other people, you destroy your own people. I mean, they hollow out really quickly, both mentally and in terms of their character. And we've had that in our history. Hegseth is not qualified that way. He is not qualified because he's pretty clearly a substance abuse user. He has also run two very small charities into the ground, and he is going to be in charge of overseeing a group of close to 3 million people and a budget of over $800 billion. Again, don't quote me on that because the numbers aren't in front of me. That's not what we want as Secretary of Defense. And the fact that Republicans are defending him is a huge slap in the face to all Americans. So what Trump is banking on with Hegseth is that Republicans are going to roll over and cave on him. And this is where what I just talked about, the media and the American people, are going to come into play. And that's that in this moment, and a number of people have said this. Mark Elias has said this, who does Democracy Docket. A number of people are talking about this. Nobody is going to save the American people going forward except ourselves. And that's a little bit starker than it needs to be today after what happened yesterday. And that's that Jennifer Rubin and Norm Eisen was associated with CNN, Jennifer Rubin was with the Washington Post, began a new independent media to protect democracy. And I hailed that as a really huge moment because a number of us have independently been trying to defend democracy, and a number of us have very large followings. Brian Tyler Cohen on YouTube, for example. I have a large following here on Facebook and on Substack, but Joyce White Vance has one, and Allison Gill of Mueller, She Wrote, and there's a huge group. I'm sorry, the Bulwark, the Dispatch, the which are right of center, the I'm sorry, of course, I'm drawing a blank now. I read a lot more than that. But there are a lot of us out there. But what Rubin and Eisen did is they pulled together a huge number of people who have left legacy media outlets as they have turned toward Trump, as the LA Times has done. You know, was a subscriber to the LA Times, but they've turned toward Trump. The Washington Post, same and same. The New York Times has been funny for a long time now, but they have failed us. And the idea now that there is this core of media that is pushing back on the fake world that Trump is creating is really important. It is really important. It was not there in 2017 when he took office. And it's important that you remember that, because I know we're all exhausted and he does not have any guardrails around him this time. But we are also organized in a way that we weren't before this. So I would urge you to follow those people and to support them with money if you can. But what I really mean is by giving eyeballs and brains to what they are talking about, for this reason. When I say that nobody is going to save us, what I mean is that Americans, there are about 330 of us, and some of us are babies and all that, but there's about 330 million of us. That's a lot of people. And what I really noticed during the Biden administration, during the Trump administration, and then during the Biden administration, was that when Trump was in office, and then in the first years of the Biden administration, people wrote to me all the time saying, what are they going to do to me? I'm so scared. What's going to happen? What are they going to do to me? And then people stopped saying that. They started talking about what they were going to do, what they cared about, how they were going to change the world. And since Trump has been reelected, I'm seeing a lot more of, I'm scared, what are they going to do to me? And I said to you then, and I will say to you now, this is our swimmy moment. If you don't know that book by Leo Leone, it's a children's book in which a whole bunch of minnows keep getting eaten by a big fish until they recognize that if they all get together, they're bigger than the big fish. And that's what democracy is all about. So when people ask me what they can do, like one of the things that happened today at the Hegseth hearings that just had me floored is, I'm drawing a blank on her name, Senator, Anyway, she asked Hegseth about ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is one of our largest partners. It has more than 600 million people in it, and he didn't know what it was. It is literally the biggest bulwark that the United States has supported against China. It works with the Quad, it works with us, and he didn't know what it was. Now, instead of yelling to me about how mad you are about that, try yelling to your senators. Not only your Democratic senators if you're in a Democratic state, but Republican senators will not take your phone calls because they want to know that you're constituents. Write them postcards. Make your voices heard. Every day that you're upset about something, do 2 forward-facing things, outward-facing things. Contacting members of Congress, contacting new people who want to rise into the ranks of politics. Certainly pushing back on social media against people who are spreading lies. But our voices, if enough people hear, we don't want Hegseth, they're going to listen. Or better yet, for Republicans, if you support Hegseth, we will make sure we hold you responsible every step of the way. And there are a number, in the Senate, the number of Republicans who are MAGA Republicans is only between 11 and 16. All the rest of those Republicans are convincible. They may not be convinced because they're scared of Trump, but they are convincible. So when I say that nobody is coming to protect us, I mean that we must push back against the lies, and we must push back against the virtual politics and Trump's appointees when they are up for office, and when they try to get people to behave in ways that violate our Constitution and our laws. And that's not going to be easy. There are a lot of people who have their necks on the line for this, but we must, as Benjamin Franklin said, we must, and maybe I'll put that in a piece for the inauguration. We must hang together, or we will. What did he say? We must all hang together, or we will all hang separately. And that's the moment that we're in going forward into this new administration, with the recognition all the time that this is not a juggernaut. This is not even Reagan. This is not the Great Society. This is not Lincoln. This is a administration that keeps claiming a mandate, but in fact is extraordinarily weak. And the other place that you need to focus on is the states. And I wrote about North Carolina recently, but certainly making people in the states aware of what is going on constantly is really important. And there's a lot of people who are out there already supporting independent media or creating independent media. So a friend of mine just put me on to a new magazine. Let's see if I can find it, out of Southwest and South Side Virginia, called Cardinal News. It's all online. It's always very cheap to produce things that are online, because you don't have to worry about now I've totally lost you. You don't have to worry about the cost of production. But if you live in an area that's a news desert that doesn't have stuff going out, think about creating an online newspaper, like I do on Substack. And you can make them look much fancier than I do. The new Contrarian that Jen Rubin and Norma Eisen started is on Substack, and it's free. You can do stuff on Facebook if you want to stay here. It's free. So these are the things that we're going to have to be doing going forward. And we have a real infrastructure already there. And one of the things that we will need to do going forward, as I say, is to push back, but also to support each other as we do this. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here, and this has really been clear to me through my email especially, but also comments, people are really angry and they're really scared. And when they do that, they take it out on each other. And I would really urge you to try not to do that. When you're angry and scared about something, write and talk to the people who are making you angry and scared. Because often I find when I say something is happening, people yell at me. Like I just told you about the Smith report. And people are yelling at me about why the Smith report didn't come out earlier. They're angry, I get that. But it doesn't help anybody for you to yell at me. What it does is it makes it harder for me to do my job, because it really does get to you when you get tons of angry emails in a row, especially when they're over something that you really have no control over. So when you get angry, when you get upset, first of all, as I say, find friends so that you're not doing it alone. But second of all, make sure that you turn that anger to where it belongs. One of the things that makes me crazy is when people are upset about what's happening in the government and they go and protest the Democrats, because they know Democrats will listen to them. And that's the same thing that the newspapers said, people like the New York Times said, is there was no point in holding Trump to account because the Republicans didn't care. Whereas if you yelled at the Democrats, they would respond. Well, fine, except what you're really doing is you're weakening the people who are on your side. So when you're upset about something that you think is wrong in the world, yell at the Republicans who are making this happen, and support those who are doing what you want, or at least say nice things to them, because that's how you make things change. And one of the things that makes me, as I say, very frustrated is I know that when the Republicans do something really bad and they need Democratic votes or whatever, people yell at the Democrats. you need to yell at the Republicans who are creating the crisis in the first place. All up and down the scale, from the president all on down to the local people in Tennessee, in North Carolina, in the places that are trying in North Carolina, for example, to steal a Supreme Court seat. Yell about that, complain about that, go to people's offices, always obeying the law. Write letters, make sure people hear that this is not the way you want your democracy to operate. Because in a way, and I'm going to be a Pollyanna here, and people often say to me, how do I have such faith? And the answer is, what are your options? Like, tomorrow's going to come. So you can either hide under the bed and say, I don't want any part of this, just make it go away. It's not going to go away. Trump's not going to stop himself. Or we can work together to support each other to make things get better. And so that's really the position I come from. Am I sanguine about the future? It's looking pretty troubling in a lot of ways, but I do have faith in us. So if you think about the next 4 years, here's what I see. Okay? And I don't know, I'm not going to predict the future, but there is one really big thing, maybe two really big things that have surprised me lately. One is the extraordinary fury poured out over the CEO murder in support of the murderer. The reason that surprises me is because one of the things that Americans have really not talked about since the 1960s is class. We're all over race, we're all over gender, we're all over religion, but we don't talk about the fact the extremely rich Americans have walked away with, as I say, trillions of dollars over that period. And the fact that that just exploded the way it did says to me there is room in the next even just year for people who may not coalesce on anything else, to coalesce around the idea that we do not want our democracy stolen by a very few rich people, like the ones who will be sitting next to Trump at his inaugural in a week, or however many days it is. The corollary to that is, for me, the surprise was the fall of Assad in Syria. Because I certainly have been following Ukraine and Russia's war in Ukraine and recognizing that Russia is badly weakened. It is badly weakened, which is one of Biden's great triumphs. That what we thought of at the time he came into office as our greatest geopolitical foe is now so terribly weakened. Russia couldn't save Assad, and now Iran couldn't save Hezbollah and Hamas, and the Houthis are weakened as well. That offers up real possibilities for democracy around the world. And I don't mean necessarily in those countries, but I mean that Russia being as strong as it was, and if you remember, they had he and Putin and Xi had like a we're going to love each other forever pact right before he invaded. That's not what it's officially called. That's just my version of it. Before he invaded Ukraine the second time in 2022, after he invaded in 2014. That looked like that was where the real strength of foreign affairs was going to be. And what they wanted to do was to destroy the international order of all these webs, NATO and CETO and ASEAN and the Quad and the European Union, and did I say NATO? All those. They wanted to tear all those apart and create spheres of influence in which big superpowers, Russia, China, and let me just say Russia, China for now, would control all the countries around them. Now you've got Trump suddenly talking about invading our allies, including Greenland, which is an autonomous region of Denmark, overseen by Denmark. They're our ally. Why on earth would we invade our ally? And similarly with the Panama Canal, and who else is he after? Canada and parts of Mexico. What's he up to? I think he is flirting with the idea that Russia has been trying to push, the idea of getting rid of all these negotiable webs that are designed to prevent world war and replacing them with spheres of influence. And what he will do if he does that is walk away from America's extraordinarily strong influence already around the globe. Say, I don't want Europe. I'm going to give Europe to Russia. Mind you, Europe's not going to go. But that's, I think, the argument. That's certainly Putin's argument. I'm going to give Europe to Russia, and I'm going to take the Americas. Now, that's a terrible idea. I'm just not, usually I don't take a stand. That's a terrible idea. So looking forward here, for all that we have real challenges going forward, we also have the ability to come together to say, we're not happy with the way our democracy has been weighted for the very wealthy. And we don't want the globe to be weighted toward the very wealthy, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about putting oligarchs in charge of spheres of influence, which is what would happen if Russia were in charge. So if we did that, we, meaning you, literally you and me, not our leaders, some of whom are fabulous and not in power, and some of whom are terrible and are in power. But if we pressure our leaders to rework our democracy according to the way it was before we got the partisan gerrymandering, for example, before we got voter suppression, before we got extraordinary money in politics because of today's Supreme Court, we could, in fact, solve a lot of problems. I mean, one of the things about Trump tearing so much down is that they will have to be rebuilt. And the more of us who have our voices in the mix for the rebuilding, the better the chance we have of regaining what are the fundamental principles of American democracy, which is that we all have a right to be treated equally before the law, and we have a right to a say in our government. And those two things that were the ones that the founders of the country in the Declaration of Independence articulated for the first time in modern society, for all that they didn't understand that women were part of that and people of color were part of that and so on, the idea that we are a nation of laws and we have the right to be treated equally before the law, and we have a right to a say in our government, that's what the protesters in Tbilisi, Georgia are in the streets for. That's what people in Gaza are arguing for. That's what people all over the world who are putting their lives on the line are trying to get. And we have the opportunity and the duty, perhaps, and the right to try and protect those things in the United States over the next 4 years. And that's going to take one heck of a lot of work, but I don't see myself that we've got any choice. All right. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to let you go. I will keep you posted on when I'm going to move to YouTube. If people are interested in continuing to watch me on Facebook, despite that move, I will try to stream over here as well. I'm going to be doing a lot of media coming up to the inauguration. And after that, I'm not entirely sure how much media I will do aside from my own and that of my friends, simply because I'm trying to write a new book in addition to the letters. But I will keep you posted. Thank you for being here. We not only can we do this, we have to do it. So I will see you. I'm going to let you know, I'm actually going to do something here with you before the inauguration, because I think people are getting pretty nervous. I will be here. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for being here.